Hello and welcome back to my channel. I am so glad you're here, and we're going to pick up on the coming deception. So this is going to go into what some people call the Nephilim or the Watchers, where many believe with a certain technology, supernatural doorways and openings can be opened. I've been working on this for a while, so I'm really glad you're here, and I hope you watched till the end. Trying to make the visuals interesting, or if you're just listening to this as a podcast, I hope you enjoy. So I thought I would touch base on the video I did a while back with Project Bluebeam. And we're going to have a discussion about the CE, the Collins Elite. Who are they? And why are they pushing the fear of aliens being demons? Do they really know something that we don't? Or are they trying to prepare the masses to be very afraid? Well, as we look into these articles that I'm going to read to you, and I know that it goes much further back than these articles that I'm going to be sharing, I thought it'd be fun to explore this topic together. So, I hope you're ready for some crazy topics that I'm going to read and different things that have happened recently and within the last 100 years. Although I know I could go back way, way, way back. And as you know, we probably will. And I can't wait. So, I hope you're ready for a deep dive and some rabbit holes. Are you ready? Let's go. 1918, famed occultist Aleister Crowley attempted to create a dimensional vortex that would bridge the gap between the world of the seen and unseen. This ritual was called the Antra working, and according to Crowley, became successful when a presence manifested itself through the rift. He called the being Lamb, and he drew a portrait of it. The startling image, detailed almost 90 years ago, bears powerful similar with the alien grays. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons attempted to do this very thing by inviting the spirit of Babylon through a portal during a sex ritual. Their hope was to incarnate the whore of Babylon, a demon child, a Giborium. I'm not sure how to say that. Parsons wrote that the ritual was successful and that at one point a brownish yellow light came through the doorway. At the same moment, he said he was struck by something invisible and a candle was knocked out of his hand. It's interesting that following Crowley's magic portal, which produced the alien-looking lamb, and Hubbard and Parsons' Babylon working ritual, Crowley died in 1947, the same year as the Roswell crash. And the same year, Kenneth Arnold, a friend of Parsons, saw his flying saucers and sightings of aliens increased around the world. Was a portal indeed open by these men's invitations? Now, Jack Parsons and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the occultist father of rocketry. Parsons came to believe in magic, a force that he felt could be explained through quantum physics. As Parsons' interest in the occult developed, his colleague, Melina, approached the National Academy of Sciences for funding into jet propulsion as a means for developing more nimble aircraft. The first government-funded rocketry research group in history, a quarter of the funding had to go towards repairing damage to Caltech buildings caused by the group's experiments, and the group was eventually forced to relocate to some iron sheds in the Arroyo Seco Canyon, where they were watched closely by the FBI. and they were keen to make sure that no political extremists were able to access the explosives. And it was here that the Jet Propulsion Laboratory would be founded. Now, one of the group's key innovations was developing jet-assisted takeoff, JATO, J-A-T-O, engines for the U.S. Air Corps, with Parsons developing a restricted burning solid rocket fuel that was stable enough to be stored indefinitely. The engine technology and fuel were commercialized through a company called Aerojet, where Parsons became project engineer. Versions of this fuel was eventually used by NASA, NACA or NASA, in the space shuttle, as well as the military ballistic missiles. And if I have anyone here that doesn't believe in space, I welcome every one of you to believe and think and be curious and always question everything. I'm reading an article, I'm sharing an article with you, and I'm so glad that you're here. But you can think of space as being outside into the air, deep into space, or you can think as it being in the depths of the ocean that have not been explored. You can think of it as anything that has not been explored in that space. Okay, so at the time in 1941, Parsons started to have a sexual relationship with his wife, Helen, 17-year-old sister, Sarah, and something that was encouraged by the church. His wife started a relationship with one of the church's most senior members, Talbot Smith, and the four of them, along with Thelmites, ended up moving into a large house together in Pasadena. Drugs flowed freely, as did sexual partners. The lodge attracted negative attention, and the police and the FBI receiving allegations that it played host to cult involved in sexual orgies and black magic. Although upon investigation, it was deemed not to represent a threat to national security. The U.S. government heard that the NAZI, Germany, was developing the V-2 rocket and gave the Galactic GALCIT Rocket Research Group, now without Parsons, a grant to develop rocket-based weapons, and the group was renamed the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. At around the time Parsons was expelled from the Aerojet by new majority shareholders who disapproved of his unorthodox and unsafe working methods, Parsons and Foreman moved onto a found in the Ad Astra Engineering Company. In 1945, science fiction writer and later founder of Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, moved into Pasadena Lodge. Sarah took some interest in Hubbard, which made Parsons jealous. He developed a deeper interest in witchcraft and the darker side of magic, becoming more fascinated by poltergeists and ghostly apparitions. In a bid to find conjure up a new lover, he took part in an extraordinary rituals. Trigger warning. In this article, it goes on to say where he would masturbate onto magical tablets to the sound of music, and I will link this article. After his girlfriend ran off with Hubbard, he decided to create his own girlfriend and summoned an elemental. After one such ritual in 1946, Parsons decided that he had managed to conjure up his perfect woman. So when he came into contact with Marjorie Cameron, he was convinced she was the one. He felt as though his elemental had arrived. Cameron had no idea that she had been invoked in this way. She became his muse and was subject of a book of poetry Parsons wrote at the time. When you think about scientists, you don't think of them as necessarily being fun or having a creative side. But Parsons saw himself of being at the end of the line of a group of scientists stretching back to Newton, who saw himself as a natural philosopher. Newton wrote about alchemy. Poetry used to be part of what the scientist was. He was a Renaissance man with a whole swath of interests. And we are going to get into more with what the UFO phenomena is, and we're going to get into the CE, which is the Collins Elite, and the most infamous Black Vault document. So I hope that you continue to listen and carry through on this. We're almost finished with this part. I just want to complete it with saying that Parsons worked on his rocketry experiments in the desert, and he would recite a pagan poem to Pan. Pendle doesn't see this as a particularly strange saying. They were all young guys. It would have been like going into a huddle and shouting the name of your team, is what this article is saying. Parsons' financial fortune fell apart after he invested his life savings in co-founding a company with Hubbard and Sarah, his ex-girlfriend, and her current primary partner. Hubbard convinced Parsons he was going to buy yachts and resell them at a profit, but this never happened. Parsons lost the vast majority of his money in the scam, and the company fell apart. And eventually, Hubbard and Sarah, they went on to found Scientology together. They were shunned in the Cold War. Parsons remained a specialist in rocketry and was often called an expert witness in police investigations involving explosives. He was good with things that went boom. So off it with rockets and explosives, says Pendle. As the Cold War set in, any academics suspected of being in the sympathy of the Big Bear country, they were frozen out. Parsons and many of his colleagues lost their security clearance, leaving him unemployed. He found himself earning money as a manual laborer, a hospital orderly, and a car mechanic. Having been pushed out of science, Parsons became even more deeply entrenched into the occult. He ended up applying his skills to create psychotechnics and explosives for the film industry, just before a planned trip to Mexico in 1952. Parsons, who was 37, received a large order of explosives for a movie. When preparing the order, there was an explosion involving mercury in which Parsons suffered fatal wounds. Some of his friends suspected a state-sponsored conspiracy, although it was ruled an accident. So now that we've kind of covered Parsons' life, now we're going to go back into this interview with our church and the UFO alien twist and what they believe is connected to government's aerospace endeavors and powerful demonic influences. So now we're going to go into this interview, and I hope you enjoy this part. Several years after the Nephilim Stargate was published, and the prophecy in the news shows, a book by Nick Redfern titled Final Events was released that repeated the basic outline of the work in this article, and at this time around reportedly had the backing of a secret government group commissioned to get to the bottom of the UFO phenomenon. The group ultimately concluded that mysterious manifestations are demonic and directly connected to Parsons and company, their Babylon workings. According to Redfern, they're called the Collins Elite. Of the email exchange in which Redfern describes how he became aware of and eventually met with the Collins Elite. Nick, tell me how you become aware of the Collins Elite. Redfern, in 2007, I had a lengthy conversation with an Anglican priest named Ray Boshi. I have no idea if that's right. Who is also a former state director for the Mutual UFO Network back in 1991, this is crazy. Back in 1991, Ray met in a Lincoln, Nebraska hotel with the 2 Department of Defense scientists who were working for a classified Pentagon project to try and contact what were termed non-human entities. The NHEs being the intelligence behind the UFO phenomenon, and the idea was to try and understand and duplicate their technology to make weapons out of it. However, the more the group looked into it, all the more they came to believe the NHEs were not extraterrestrial in origin, but were using that image as a cover. Their real origin, the group finally believed, was literally demonic. Ray related this and much more to me, which collectively demonstrated that there was a group, or probably groups, within the U.S. government that believed the UFO phenomena is real, but is of a negative spiritual nature. One of those groups called itself the Collins Elite, and that's the one I had contact with. Under what circumstances did you first meet with them? Redford. This chiefly came by following all the data that Ray Bochi, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, or Bucci, Ray preferred I left out of my book on the subject, titled Final Events. And I did, indeed, leave out of the book that data Ray asked me not to include. The collective data, names, dates, places, etc. Let me chase things down further. I openly phoned a number of places linked to the story, government and military facilities, and laid my cards on the table and told them what I was looking for. A group in the government that concluded UFOs have demonic origins. I often find that taking a very forthright and very alternate approach like this can open doors. Sometimes letting people know you're looking is actually a good thing and make them wonder why. And it can lead to positive developments. Not always, but sometimes it works. And in this case, it did. That led me to a handful of people from the Collins Elite. They initiated all, literally all, of the contact I had with them, by phone and in person. Meetings occurred chiefly at dinners, restaurants, and in hotels of their choosing. What was the conclusion of the CE in relation to the UFO phenomena? Their belief is that the UFO phenomenon is 100% real, but that its origin is satanic. As they see it, the aliens are visiting us. The angle is a camouflage to allow Satan, if he really exists, of course, to get his grips into us. They believe that the presence of the UFO phenomenon right now, and since 1947, in the commencement of the end time scenario where the ET landing angle may be played out to con the world into believing the Greys are friendly extraterrestrials. The CE believes that the belief and prayer, rather than the weapons, can hold off this infiltration and invasion. How do Jack Parsons, Aleister Crowley, and gang tie in? In its very earliest years, the late 1940s to the early 1950s, the CE focused a great deal of its attention on Crowley and Parsons and their connections. Parsons' interest in UFOs and rocketry, and Crowley's manifestation of the great alien lamb during the Almaratra, I'm not sure how to say that, working of 1918, was chiefly these two men and their actions that laid the foundations for the how and why. The CEs, the Collins Elites, beliefs concerning the theory that the UFO phenomena is demonic, deceptive, manipulative, and deadly. From there, the CE began looking at the early contactees and George Adamski's Crowley connection and George Hunt Williamson's use of Ouija boards to contact alleged alien entities. This is how their beliefs began to be constructed, by putting all these threads together and trying to make some collective sense of it all. Did the CE, the Collins Elite, provide you with any documentation? I was given access to some documents. Some of them are in the book, others I have never revealed for various reasons, mostly based on the requests, not from the CE. One lengthy document came to me via the group and was one of their own reports, which further bolstered their beliefs that the UFO phenomenon is a satanic deception. They also provided me with other documents that have surfaced via the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and which they had on file, as it was all relative to their research, such as the FBI's and Air Force files on Jack Parsons, and official documentation on remote viewing. The CE, Collins Elite, created documentation is not covered by the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, provisions, because the Collins Elite, CE, is technically not an agency or group of government. Its members are government employees, but their work for CE is done in a private capacity. So, while they have definitely received government funding and support, their research is technically not, quote, government work, quote. And therefore, their self-created documents are not subject to government secrecy laws. However, the Collins Elite has deeply influenced powerful figures in government for decades, which makes the group's work and its position extremely important in terms of what people in government, the military, intelligence community thinks about the demonic theory. As far as you know, were members of the Collins Elite Roman Catholic, or did they ever convey a Roman Catholic theological worldview? Not as far as I know, but I could be totally wrong for the following reason. It's important to note that the overwhelming majority of the data given to me was provided to me in the form of statements and disclosures. That's to say, they shared what parts of their story and their work that they wanted to share. I was rarely given the opportunity to ask questions. You mentioned Lieutenant Colonel Nelson's Pacheco's work unmasking the enemy in your book. Are you aware it promotes Mary as deity? Yes, I am aware of that. I've read the book a couple of times. A lot of the conclusions are similar to those reached by the Collins Elite. Is CE, the Collins Elite member, Richard Duke, willing to talk to me? I have no idea. The meetings I had, which covered 2007 to 2010, were always at the control of the people I spoke with. I was never, ever able to initiate a contact aside from when I put out those initial feelers. After that, it was always a case of them pulling the strings and advising me when and where information. So all I can say is that given that you are covering very similar territory and research to that contained in my Final Events book, it would not surprise me if an approach is one day made or an exchange of data occurs, but I'm not able to influence that. Can we see the photocopies of the Collins report? Maybe one day, and the other documents too. This is a bit of a gray area, as the report was prepared by the Collins elite and for Collins elite members, and for the interested parties of the government, military, and intelligence community. But because the CE, Collins elite, is not technically an agency or armed government, the report itself falls, copyright-wise, under the ownership of the man who wrote it. It was allowed to reproduce a couple of pages of text in my Final Events book, chiefly as it relates to the demonic theory for Roswell. But because the document is the private work of an individual and intended for the membership of the Collins elite and others interested people in government, it's still his private work. In that sense, it's protected. It's as protected as any author's book is. So it's not a document that can be obtained via the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, as it's not a government document. Permission would have to come from the author, just like in any normal situation, where the author's permission is sought to quote from their books, etc. Following the phone and email exchanges with Redfern, I continued, doubting much of his story, but made fairly significant efforts to verify it while giving him the benefit of a doubt. I've also, on several occasions, repeated my willingness to meet with a member of the Collins group anywhere, anytime, and have been told a meeting between them and I could occur. Though as of this date, I am still waiting. Meanwhile, my sources in the United States, which extend from the U.S. military intelligence to national defense employees with both Department of Defense and Intel top secret security clearances, came back empty-handed. This included our friend Colonel Steve Bauer, who served longer as a U.S. government military aide than anyone in the history of the White House under 5 U.S. presidents, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, and Bush. Bauer had never heard of the Collins elite and couldn't locate a single intelligent resource that otherwise would substantiate Redford's claims. But I knew, having said that this by itself didn't prove the story as detailed in Final Events was untrue. Counterintelligence, majestic 12-level compartmentalization, and official denial is a well-established part of the government's past and present protocols when handling questions concerning UFOs and so-called alien abduction activity, a fact that every significant investigator into this phenomenon has run into when trying to separate fact from fiction. So I moved on, and I checked with another international contact, former director of Britain's Military of Defense's Department for UFO Research, Nick Pope, and was surprised when he cautioned against disbelief and even confirmed the existence of a Collins elite-like group among Britain's aristocracy. Following this, I reached out to the Ball Aerospace contact who works with the advanced systems and technologies for space control and special missions. He too cautioned against doubting the Collins reality and sent me a 4-page document outlining the following main points, ending with an ominous warning. Below are just some of the talking points from his meticulous outline. Security levels and compartments. Start with understanding that top secret Department of Defense and sensitive compartment information intelligence world clearing is the first level of clearance, required before one gets to SAP programs. There are at least 4 levels of top secret special access program, SAPs, that currently exist in the US DoD Intel world. Acknowledged top secret SAPs, security cleared, Congress or staff has access to full knowledge of program name, mission, budget, etc. Unacknowledged top secret SAPs, cleared Congress or staff, has access to full knowledge. Unacknowledged, waived top secret SAPs, program budget, customer, and missions are highly classified. Only 2 senators and 2 congressmen are made aware of the program, typically at a very high level only, typically referred to as a black program. Completely unacknowledged top secret SAPs. No acknowledgement or overview to the Congress. Accountable only to the agency that authorizes mission and money ostensibly related to a presidential order. Really known as deep black in the vernacular. This level in itself not acknowledged can be acknowledged for obvious reasons. 2 agencies in particular make great use of this, CIA and NSA. With more than 25 years in the world, I have personally have experience with levels 1 through 3 only. Level 4 is outside my scope. Most of the high-level UFO work is done at level 4. It is not acknowledged and specifically not even known except to those briefed into the compartment program. Only leaks aid in the process of discovery. This is likely a strong reason why Nick Pope is reluctant to spell out unambiguously what, by definition, is meant to be concealed at an unacknowledged level. Formation of the Collins elite. A number of intelligent agencies looking at the UFO situation are drawn into the orbit of a large picture held by the CIA. Army Intel, Navy Intel, Air Force Intel, Defense Intel Agency, DIA, etc. This seems consistent with the how high level exchange takes place. They contribute to larger efforts out of their own agencies and budgets. A subgroup of the CIA dominated and controlled compartment informally sees things differently and begins to form a counterpoint voice to the research. They call themselves, after a time, the Collins elite. This seems plausible based on the discussions and factions I have seen over the years. Independent thinking is valued. Like-minded experts gather around themselves. Over time, the Collins elite position becomes more refined, more emphatic, more concerned. One notes that most of these guys are industry old-timers with an old Christian worldview, having been covert intel circling for 30 to 40 years. The Collins elite seems to be an internal but informal collection of guys who maintain their independence of thought about matters in this highly classified and clearly controversial realm. Review. Intelligence agencies are trying to understand UFOs in the early 1950s. Same intel agencies also trying to understand the occult sorcery of the 2 key figures, Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons, and how it could be applied as a national defense asset. Deeply covert CIA-controlled intel group wants to pursue research psychotronic weapons and remote viewing technologies and embark on diluting journey, a perverted scheme and Faustian bargaining. After years and decades of incremental research in this area, several deaths more recently occur to test subjects in these realms. Things are going badly awry. A subgroup watching all this, loosely confederated, calling itself the Collins Elite, begins to recognize this is a completely occult, demonic, satanic, and begins to organize itself as a counterpoint to the general research direction. The Collins Elite begin to see a much larger and terrifying picture of what this whole unleashed enterprise is leading to. The connection to fallen angels, the Nephilim, and a plan for taking over the world. Conclusion. This unsettling story has every indication of being true. It follows directly from everything you and I know about UFOs and their ultimately nefarious mission tied to an end-time prophetic scenario. Unraveling this further is loaded with known and unknown complexities, and that includes dangers, emphasized, added. Following the thorough examination from my friend at Ball Aerospace and subsequent inquiries through friends like LTC, Robert Maginnis, and the Pentagon, I remain as unconvinced as ever that the so-called Collins Elite is anything more than the fabric of an overactive imagination. That said, I could be wrong, and we have been and are uncovering evidence that authenticate unnamed enigmatic group is indeed active in the U.S. intelligence with knowledge of alien demon connection that we remain dedicated to uncovering, which we'll pick up in the next entry. Up next, DNA harvesting, genetic manipulation, the seed of the serpent.
You ever had a dream, Neo, that you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream? How would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world?
What is happening to me?
The answer is out there, Neo.
After relaying an informant's claim that the saucers had been found because the government's high-powered radar in the area had interfered with the controlling mechanisms of the saucers, that no further evaluation was attempted concerning the matter by the FBI agent, Guy Hottel. He was born around 1902. He was a graduate of George Washington University in Washington, D.C., Athletic Hall of Fame. He entered the FBI as a special agent in 1934. December 1936, he was named acting head of the FBI Washington Field Office and served until 1951, when he took a position in the Identification Division. Says that might have been the end of this particular story, just another informational dead end in the FBI files. So what's the real story? Here's a few facts to keep in mind. The Hottel memo is dated nearly 3 years after the infamous events in the Roswell. As noted in the earlier story, the FBI has occasionally been involved in investigating reports of UFOs and extraterrestrials. Director Hoover did order his agents at the request of the Air Force to verify any UFO sightings. That practice ended in July 1950, 4 months after the Hottel memo. And look at where we are at now. Well, you've made it to the end. I hope this has been interesting, maybe something you haven't heard before. Or if you have, or a different version, please comment below. And we have so many more deep dives and rabbit holes, and I can't wait until the next video or live. Remember, never underestimate the power of kindness. Please be kind. I hope someone's kind to you. Humongous hugs, high fives, and good vibes, always. I really appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. I look forward to your comments. You liking and sharing means the world.